Okay, let's go ahead and get started. This evening's 21st class of our 24. So we're coming down to the finish line here. So, all right, let's go forward with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. As usual, just do this once. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. I'll do the short mandala offering next. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Radna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then refuge in bodhicitta, first time in English, then twice more in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar sho. Right, let's do a short meditation, just focusing on the breath for a few minutes to calm the mind, and then I'll come in and lead you in setting motivation for tonight's class. Now, to set our motivation for tonight, let's meditate briefly on the verse that we covered at the very end of last week. And this is where we're going through the meaning, the correspondence to that which is obscured. And there was one that pertained to this second characteristic of the nature of the basic element, its suchness, and the fact that that suchness is undifferentiable. The mind of a Buddha has the same emptiness that our own minds possess. The suchness is the same. And in that verse, Maitreya says, as the nature is unchanging, virtuous, and of natural purity, so suchness is said to resemble a golden statue. When the simile, we had this gold that was covered with filth. The nature of the gold is unchanging. In the same way, the nature of our own minds is unchanging. Our minds have always been empty of inherent existence, and they always will be. The Buddha nature that we have now, the naturally abiding lineage, is that emptiness with defilement, with these obscurations. When we become a Buddha, it will be the nature that is without defilement, that suchness that is the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha, together with the complete purity of all the adventitious defilements. So we possess kind of this basic fact, this underpinning of the emptiness of our minds that allows us to achieve Buddhahood. The second quality that was mentioned in the verse was it being virtuous. Well, gold doesn't really have virtue per se, but nonetheless, many wonderful things can be made of that gold. And make it into statues and ornaments and all sorts of things. It has a very positive quality within our world. It has great value. Well, suchness, the emptiness of our minds, also has a virtue, what we referred to last week as ultimate virtue. It is the mind or the topic that our minds can meditate on to bring about the greatest virtue. The realization of the emptiness of our minds will help us to achieve everything up through Buddhahood. In this way, it acts as ultimate virtue. And then the third quality, it's of natural purity. Well, this is something we've seen throughout this entire text, that this suchness is without any natural stain. In fact, that's the meaning of it, that it is our minds are empty of having any inherently existent stain. The defilements are adventitious. In the same way, gold, even though it might be covered in filth or have other things that obscure its purity, it still has that purity. It retains it. It's never tainted by it, never tarnished in any way, in a lasting way. Everything can be removed. So again, these are the ways in which we can think about this naturally abiding lineage, which is the Buddha nature in its most ultimate way. What we've been studying throughout this entire course is primarily the emptiness of the mind that allows for the change of our own beings from sentient beings who are together with defilement into Buddhas who are completely free of that. And so we set bodhicitta within that understanding that because we possess this naturally abiding lineage, we ourselves can transform into that state. Complete enlightenment. But we do it not for our own welfare, but for the welfare of all beings. Because we see that in that state of Buddhahood, we then will be able to help others to uncover their own golden Buddha nature, help them to see that they have what it takes to be able to achieve the same state that we ourselves will have achieved. Just like the Buddhas before us are pointing us in that same direction. So generate that aspiration to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all beings within the understanding of Buddha nature. That we and all beings can eventually attain that same state. Okay, good to be back with all of you again tonight. I wanted to meditate on that verse because we're still in the commentary on that verse. We haven't finished that verse completely. So let me go ahead and start. If you do have any questions, were there any questions from last week? Maybe that's a good place to start. Make sure that there's nothing before I kind of resume. Anything? No? So again, we're in this section where we are looking at that which is obscured. This is the last part of these 9 similes. I might even go very briefly to the charts that we have. Let's see. No, it's not there. Sorry, not there. That's another chart I want to refer to later. No, not there. Okay, that's the root text. Okay, right here. These are the charts that, by the way, when we finish this, I thought about for a moment about maybe going through all of these 9 on here where we kind of have a summary of them. But what I'm going to do is certainly invite you to do that on your own once we complete the 9 similes, which I'm sure we will do tonight. But if we have time in the final class, maybe we'll go through that because it is kind of interesting to go through it with the understanding of all of this. And I'll point out some things in regard to it a little bit later. But so we are in this section again where we're looking at in the simile, something is obscured. We have the Buddha form, honey, so on, all the way we're right here now at number 4, gold. Gold that is again is obscured by filth. We see that there's a meaning of what is obscuring, and we went through all 9 of those. And now we're looking at the meaning of the obscured. Now, again, for this chart, they just divided it into Dharmakaya, suchness, and lineage, because those are the 3 qualities, 3 characteristics of the nature. We go back to the first of the 10 presentations and verse 27 that I shared with you last time. And essentially, we have these 3 in summary form. But we'll see again that within the Dharmakaya, there were different divisions, the truth body itself, wisdom truth body, then the definitive sutra, definitive meaning sutras, and then the provisional meaning sutras. Those were the 3 kind of deeper meanings for those parts of the simile, for what's obscured. And then we're going to go on tonight to go through the 5 that are related to lineage. Because again, we had that verse 27 that pointed out those 3 aspects of the nature of Buddha, the basic element, Buddha nature, whatever term we give for it. So we'll go into that tonight. So again, this was the verse that we just meditated on. I won't go through this entire paragraph because it's essentially saying what we just reflected on, these 3 qualities of being unchanging, virtuous, and of natural purity. All right. It's interesting that they do say resemble a golden statue when it is gold in the simile, but again, there are some slight differences in things, and I can't explain why that is so. I don't know that any of them really go into that detail of around that. We're on the very next page. This is page 200 of our commentary, and we didn't finish this section that's an explanation of the text, what we just looked at in terms of that verse. So Gyaltsab says, the minds of sentient beings are tied to limitless affliction and suffering, and yet mind is clear light by nature and does not change from its natural emptiness. So again, this idea of mind being clear light by nature is what we studied in the 10 presentations as the primary topic there. But this unchanging quality of the emptiness of the mind, that natural emptiness is there all the time. It's not something newly invented by the Buddha. This was the quality of our minds from beginningless time. Therefore, like pure gold, it does not change into anything else and is therefore known as suchness. It's always gold. It always has that nature. Suchness always has that nature, whether we're in the hell realms or whether we're in the God realms or whether we're a Buddha. Suchness is the same. Without any difference in its nature, it exists in all sentient beings endowed with definite causes of great error, which is explained as meaning those causes that do not produce nirvana, right? The causes that continue to produce samsara. Although it's got an unchanging nature, it's together with sentient beings whose minds are with defilement and with all of the erroneous thoughts and ignorance and so on that keep us in samsara. Then the next sentence, purified of adventitious affliction and of all obscuration to omniscience, it is known as Tathagata. So again, when we have removed all those adventitious afflictions, everything that obscures us, down to those last, even subtlest levels of the obscurations to knowledge or to omniscience, then we become Tathagata, the one gone thus. Whether this is saying that the suchness of all sentient beings is Tathagata, or the suchness purified of all defilement is Tathagata, is something to investigate. And he actually investigates it in a paragraph coming up, not this next one, but the one after. But essentially, I mean, if we were to say that the suchness of the minds of beings is Tathagata, it is the Buddha, well, we have a problem then, right? Because it's not the Buddha yet. The suchness of the mind without defilements becomes the Buddha. So this is, again, what he's going to reiterate in that paragraph that's to come. So let's go back to the commentary. Therefore, this one simile of gold is presented on the basis of suchness being indivisible, in the sense that its entity is not divided into different aspects. And on that basis, it is taught that the suchness of the Tathagata is the essence of sentient beings. Again, it's undifferentiable. The suchness of the mind of a Buddha, the suchness of our crazy defiled minds, exactly the same. And that's why there's only one simile, is because we're talking about one taste, everything being of the same taste of emptiness. Not that all emptinesses are identical, that there's only one emptiness, but that emptiness of each individual phenomenon that exists conventionally is the same. It's not, it can't be differentiated at that level. Only differentiated on the basis, the conventional phenomenon, that it is posited on. Of the three reasons for stating, again, this is going back to that verse 27 that we saw previously, right? Last week, I even shared it back with you. We saw it many weeks ago in terms of when it came up in our commentary. So of the three reasons within that verse for stating all sentient beings possess the Tathagata essence, this section clearly teaches the second of those, again, which is the fact that suchness is undifferentiable. I've got that verse written down here again, because, let me go ahead and take it off screen for a moment. I forgot to kind of insert it in the slides, but because the activities of the Dharmakaya are pervasive, remember that's the first reason, that we are all sentient beings under the influence of the wisdom truth body that is making waves of enlightened activity continually. Because suchness is undifferentiable, that's the second reason. And then third, and because of having the lineage, because of possessing this ability to transform the mind through the developmental lineage, all sentient beings always have the Buddha essence. So again, that's just speaking to the fact that there's a sort of proof, if you will, that sentient beings all possess Buddha nature, given in that verse. And this is the second reason that is set out, again, that suchness is undifferentiable. So it says, because the natural purity aspect of the mind of the actual Tathagata and the natural purity aspect of the minds of sentient beings, unlike the colors blue and yellow, are indivisible. And we cannot differentiate the taste of emptiness or the phenomenon that is emptiness, that is the emptiness of the Tathagata's mind, from the emptiness of the minds of sentient beings who still have defilement. It has been clearly explained, Gyaltsab says, that this is the thinking behind the statement, sentient beings possess Tathagata essence. Exactly, that this is why. Therefore, the assertion that the Tathagata exists in the minds of sentient beings has not been thought out at all. So again, we can't say that this Tathagata is the minds of all sentient beings, or the emptiness of the minds of all sentient beings. Rather, that Tathagata essence, the same essential nature of the mind of the Tathagata, is identical to the mind, the essential nature of the mind of a sentient being with defilement. So again, we can't say that Tathagata already exists, and this would be a misunderstanding if we were to say we are already Buddhas, right? I hear this even from some Buddhist teachers, and it's kind of disturbing because it makes people think in some regard that we really don't have anything to do then, right? We just have to wake up to that fact. Oh, I already am a Buddha. Well, no, you aren't already a Buddha. There was that wonderful quote from D.T. Suzuki, who looked out at the group of people that were in the teaching hall at that time, and he said, "You're all perfect just as you are." and you could use a little work. so, so it's kind of this idea that there's this perfect nature that is our emptiness of our minds, that is, again, the main reason for the ability to become a Buddha, because things don't exist inherently, because we aren't stuck in this crazy, deluded samsaric state. We can actually transform the mind due to that emptiness. So we could use a little work, and my saying, I mean, we could use a lot of work. At least I know I could use a lot of work. But this is reassuring that we have this kind of. This keeps going away from my mouth here. There we go. I think that's a little better. We have this perfect nature that's underneath everything that we can rely upon. So as long as we have that, as long as we are able to rest in that knowledge, then we can use that as a foundation for being able to become enlightened. So yeah, it really seems to be kind of, let me see if I can get it around a little more. That's better, I think. Okay, good. Let's go back to the commentary. So I'm going to skip over this next section that's just at the bottom of that page and go to the top of the next page. Yeah, just this little section on the sutra scriptural citation. So at the top of page 201, we now get the 5 similes that have a correspondence to lineage. Remember on the chart that I just showed you, these are the last 5 similes in terms of what is obscured. They have different aspects of the lineage, starting with the 2 types of lineage, naturally abiding lineage and developmental lineage, and then the results of that lineage, or both of them combined, which are essentially the nature truth body and the 2 form bodies. So that constitutes the 5. So let's look at what is said in this first verse, which actually pertains to the 5th and the 6th of the similes. Like a treasure and a fruit tree, the lineage is known to be twofold: the beginningless, naturally abiding lineage, and the developmental lineage, perfectly arising through hearing and contemplating the naturally abiding lineage. So we have this naturally abiding lineage, the emptiness of our own minds, the suchness of our minds, it's with defilements. And we have the developmental lineage that develops through realizing the emptiness of the mind, through realizing the emptiness of all phenomena. And again, these are respectively compared to a treasure. And the idea here is a treasure that is under the ground that has always been there, that we don't know about. It's kind of naturally there. And then the fruit tree, we've talked about before, that it's a developmental thing, right? We start with the fruit that is surrounding the seed, and from the seed comes the sprout, all the way up into the tree, and so on. Like treasure that has been there since the beginning, and like a tree that is the fruit of effort, the lineage has 2 aspects. These are the naturally abiding lineage, which has abided as the nature of mind since beginningless time, and the lineage arising from correct adoption, which is the phrase that again is used in this text in terms of the translation of developmental lineage. The lineage arising from correct adoption, which is brought about by the force of the circumstance, such as hearing and contemplation, right? When we hear the teachings on emptiness, we think about them, contemplate them, and eventually we meditate on them and we realize them. And then we begin the process of removing all of those obscurations. And then this interesting sentence at the end: the latter of these 2 is considered the greater because it is characterized by having potential. I mean, it is interesting when you think about these 2 aspects of Buddha lineage, Buddha nature. There's no real potential within the emptiness of the mind, if you will, because it's an emptiness, it's a negation, it's always been there. We've always had that. The potential actually resides within the mind itself that can develop. Due to the fact of its emptiness, therefore we can change the thoughts in our minds. We can overcome all of the afflictive obscurations and eventually the knowledge obscurations through the wisdom that realizes emptiness, again, through first hearing and listening, through contemplation, reflection, and then eventually through meditation, when we're able to develop the insight and meditative equipoise that will begin the process of removing these afflictive obscurations and so on. So this is the idea behind those 2. So let's go into each of them individually, because there is a separate. Oh, I'm sorry. This is going on to the next one, the potential of the lineage. So what I need to do at this point, sorry, is go back and share Geshe Loden slides. Whoops, get that up on the screen and do the slideshow from here. So again, I did have some of these slides in last week's, but I just have kind of put them into this week's because this is where they're actually going to be covered. Geshe Loden gives a small introduction to these two and then goes into them individually. Buddha potential, as illustrated explicitly in this verse, is of two types. The natural potential or lineage, which exists of itself beginninglessly, and number 6, the developed potential, which is his term for that, which arises through being perfected by the wisdoms of listening, thinking, meditation, and so forth. Remember, these are the 3 main wisdoms that we talked about on Monday's class on the emptiness module of discovering Buddhism. This is how we actually are able to develop an understanding of the Dharma through listening, hearing the teachings, reading, and so on, bringing that information in, contemplating, thinking, reflecting on it, and then eventually developing the union of calm abiding and special insight. That is a meditation that will allow us to actually remove those layers of obscuration. The natural potential is likened to a precious treasure, just as a precious treasure is the source of a great variety of beautiful jewels. So the natural potential is the source of all the various qualities of a Buddha, the 10 powers, and so forth. And we can say it's the source, but once more, it's not an impermanent phenomenon. It's not a produced phenomenon. It's attained. The state of Buddhahood is attained by virtue of the natural potential, the emptiness of the mind. But it itself is not those things. The developmental potential is the one that actually becomes those qualities of a Buddha. The developed potential, Geshe Loden says, is likened to a fruit tree. When a fruit tree is properly nurtured by the conditions of water, manure, and heat, it grows more and more. Similarly, when the developed potential is nurtured by the wisdom of listening and so on, its qualities increase further and further. So we have these two, perfect examples in many ways for these 2 types of lineage. The naturally abiding lineage being like this treasure that is underneath the ground there on its own. It's not something that is planted there by anyone else, just like we have natural pockets of precious substances on the earth and what have you, right? So it can be extracted and used once we know about it. Once we know that we have that natural potential, that there is the suchness of our minds, it can be the basis for developing all these qualities. But the qualities themselves are developed within the developmental lineage, which means the conventional mind, the mind that is clear and knowing, that goes through a process through acclimating oneself to the Dharma. That phrase that was used there, a correct adoption, correctly adopting what the Buddha taught, and then developing the mind to the greatest degree. All right. So these 2 are the first 2 of the 5 that pertain to lineage. The other 2 have to do with, again, the results of lineage, or it's used in our outline there at the top of the screen. It's the similes for the potential of the lineage. So let's look at verse 151. It is held that the 3 bodies of a Buddha are attained by virtue of this twofold lineage. Right? So this is kind of saying, we all have these 2 aspects of lineage, naturally abiding and developmental. What is attained on the basis of that? Because recall, that was one reason why I put this slide up here. Recall way back, beginning of this course, when we looked at the 7 vajra points, and we saw, that essentially we have these 3 jewels at the first 3 topics, the Buddha jewel, Dharma jewel, Sangha jewel, which we're trying to achieve. This is the resultant 3 jewels, as it says there on the left-hand side, to be achieved by oneself, the ultimate goal that you want to achieve. The substantial cause that will bring about your achievement, the basis for you to achieve the desired goal of being the 3 jewels, is the basic element, the Buddha nature. And again, at its ultimate level, it's the emptiness of the minds of sentient beings that possesses, our minds possess defilements and stains, and the power or the energy in the minds of sentient beings, which is the developmental lineage, can actually cultivate all of the qualities of a Buddha. That's the conventional Buddha lineage or Buddha nature. So again, recall that this is what we're talking about here in terms of the first 2 represent the basis, and then the last 3 are the results. So cause and result once more. Initially, the lineage is awoken by circumstances. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but the main thing that occurs to awaken your lineage is great compassion. When you develop great compassion, then you are moving in the right direction, because the outcoming of having great compassion that wishes to free all sentient beings from suffering is to become a Buddha, to accomplish that. So as it says there, when you're awoken by circumstances, bodhicitta is developed. By that, it means conventional bodhicitta, not ultimate bodhicitta that's realizing emptiness. Its practices are taken up, and the desire to attain the three bodies of a Buddha is generated. Because again, bodhicitta, conventional bodhicitta, is the wish to become a Buddha, to achieve the resultant state of the three jewels in order to benefit all sentient beings. The first of the three bodies, the Dharmakaya, and this is in particularly meaning the nature truth body, the Svabhavika Kaya, is attained through the first lineage, the naturally abiding lineage, right? The two form bodies are attained through the second lineage, the lineage arising from correct adoption or developmental lineage. Again, because those are the compounded aspects. Go back to those initial definitions of Buddha nature, which I don't have in front of me, but the developmental lineage was that which forms, eventually creates the result of the compounded bodies of a Buddha, whereas the naturally abiding creates the uncompounded, the emptiness and the absence of defilement in the mind of a Buddha. Okay. So let's go on to the next paragraph here. The result of the development of wisdom accumulation is the Dharmakaya of twofold purity, with its suchness purified of defilement, and its exalted wisdom realizing the ultimate truth of all phenomena. So what this paragraph is going into is it's kind of just talking in general about when we say we have these two accumulations. Let me take it off screen for just a moment. Oops, sorry. With these two accumulations that we often talk about as being like the two wings of a bird, right? So we have the one wing that is the wing of wisdom, and we have the wing of method. And when we talk about method, we mean all of the conventional practices, but especially for the bodhisattva, bodhicitta, conventional bodhicitta, and all of the bodhisattva's practices that support that. Wisdom is primarily the perfection of wisdom and the development of this insight into emptiness. So we have these two things that we have to kind of accumulate. We have to work with specific practices that develop the ability to actualize the nature truth body and sort of the wisdom mind of a Buddha, which is, again, the culmination of the wisdom aspect, and then the form bodies, as well as the knowledge of conventional reality that's in the mind of a Buddha. This is the way they're kind of dividing these up. When we talk about the mind of a Buddha, the mind of a Buddha has two aspects. It has the meditative equipoise that is always realizing emptiness all the time. But it also has the awareness of all conventional phenomena all the time. There's kind of separate causes for creating both of those, because we have to engage in the bodhisattva practices and deepening our bodhicitta and so on, so that we can actually have that awareness of all conventional phenomena. But then we, of course, realize emptiness repeatedly until we develop the mind of a Buddha that is in meditative equipoise on emptiness all the time. So we have two kind of divisions of the wisdom truth body, in a sense, by virtue of the two different wisdoms that a Buddha has: knowledge of ultimate truth and knowledge of conventional truth. But nonetheless, the form bodies are quite specifically a result of the practice of the accumulation of merit or method, and then the accumulation of wisdom is definitely bringing about the nature truth body. So when we talk about it in that way, this accumulation of wisdom from that wisdom wing is the Dharmakaya, the truth body of twofold purity, which is the nature truth body, right? It's got its natural purity, plus it has the purity of the adventitious defilement, which is what's mentioned here. It also will bring about the exalted wisdom realizing the ultimate truth of all phenomena, right? Because that is the culmination of repeated meditation on emptiness. That is the means by which all of these defilements are removed. So when you get to the final product, those are the result of the wisdom accumulation, the wisdom wing. The result of the development of merit accumulation, which is on the method side, is the twofold form body of a Buddha, right? Because we need those form bodies to be able to uh, get to sentient beings, be in their presence, and act the enlightened deeds for their benefit. And the exalted wisdom realizing all conventional truths. So when we talk about the Jnana Dharmakaya, the wisdom truth body, we can talk about it in two different aspects in that way. I mean, it's really a singular mind that is knowing all these things simultaneously. But nonetheless, we can say there's a culmination of the wisdom wing and the wisdom accumulation that results in the knowledge of ultimate truth. And then there is the culmination of the method wing, the merit accumulation, which results in the conventional truth, knowledge of the conventional truths. And those are part and parcel of the wisdom truth body of a Buddha, the mind of a Buddha. But for the sake of talking about where they arise from, they arise from these two accumulations. Now, the accumulations, again, are done within the developmental lineage, right? The mind of a sentient being that eventually becomes the mind of a Buddha. The emptiness is what allows for all of that. It isn't actually transforming into anything else. It just continues to be a support for this whole development of these two aspects, the accumulation of wisdom and the accumulation of merit. So the next paragraph, the exalted wisdom within the mind of a Buddha then appears as the form bodies. This is how we talk about it. They say when you attain Buddhahood, you instantly have all of these bodies of a Buddha. It's not like you attain the wisdom body, wisdom truth body, and then you kind of have some sort of impulse. Because remember, once you get to this level, there's no effort involved. You spontaneously are manifesting form bodies for the benefit of other beings. So we can say it's sort of the source, but it's not a direct cause because it doesn't precede the form bodies. It arises simultaneous with the form bodies. So that first sentence, again, this exalted wisdom within the mind of a Buddha appears then as the form bodies. And these can be abridged as the major and minor marks of enlightenment. But it should be known that there is not a trace of a material body composed of atoms and so forth. Unlike our bodies that are composed of all this physical matter and stuff, the body of a Buddha that is a form body doesn't have that same kind of conditioning. Nonetheless, it appears like that to sentient beings, right? We see, if we're having contact with Buddhists, which many of us hold in regard to many of our gurus, that we then are seeing what appears to be bodies that are made up of, composed of atoms and so on. But they are not actually composed in that way. Then he goes on to refute an assertion. He says, the assertion, though, that the form bodies of a Buddha are merely appearances in the minds of disciples, but do not exist at all as part of the Buddha's continuum, is no different to the assertion of the outsider Mimamsaka, which claims that it is impossible for a person to be completely purified of all defilement. Similarly, assertions that all conventional truths do not appear to a Buddha should also be known as wrong. He's just kind of shooting down different mistaken ideas. I'm not sure exactly everything that's entailed in this thing of saying that they do not exist at all as part of the Buddha's continuum. I mean, it sounds kind of strange to say that there's just this appearance in the mind of sentient beings that is not a part of a Buddhist continuum, but I don't know. I'm not really familiar with this Mimamsakas and with these other folks that might hold such a thing. What is happening again is that the enlightened mind of a Buddha, which is kind of over here and here to some degree, through the force of what we've done on the path of learning, when you enter into the path of no more learning, it spontaneously appears. That mind is inseparable from these bodies that appear in this world that again have a appearance of being composed of atoms, being like our own bodies and so on, but are not conditioned in the same way. Because again, there's no conditioning in the mind of a Buddha to create those sorts of things. There's no longer any of the causes that are entailed in creating samsaric appearances through the causes of samsara, the afflictions, and so on. So all of that is kind of gone, but nonetheless, these beings still manifest in our world, and that is what a Buddha is. A Buddha is the form body of a Buddha, the emanation body, the enjoyment body, and so on. There's no differentiation at some level, even though the mind of the Buddha we can still isolate as being different from these form bodies, these appearances. So let's go into the actual simile explanation of these, and then we'll share what Geshe Loden has to share as well. Um, the beauty of the nature body, this is the seventh of the similes, should be known as like a precious statue because it does not naturally arise and is a treasure of good qualities. So we'll look at the commentary in a moment on that. And then 153, in the first two lines, it goes into the eighth simile, where that which is obscured, which again is like this universal monarch, and then the ninth, which is like a golden image. Um, Possessing the majesty of the great vehicle Dharma, the perfect enjoyment body is like a wheel-turning king. Because of being in the nature of a reflection, the emanation body is likened to a golden image. It's sort of a reflection of the enjoyment body of the Buddha. We talk about these bodies just a little bit because I think it's worthwhile to spend a little bit of time kind of going into them. When we talk about the enjoyment body of a Buddha, and this is kind of the culmination of so much of the purification that the Bodhisattva has engaged in on the learning path, that results in this appearance, pretty much for eternity, of a Buddha residing in their own pure land. When we talk about the Sambhogakaya or complete enjoyment body, there are actually said to be 5 certainties with regard to this being. First of all, it's in a definite abode. I'm reading from Geshe Loden's book now. The enjoyment body abides only in what's called a heavily adorned pious pure land, what's usually referred to as akanishta. Though never abiding in other places, the enjoyment body's emanations go everywhere. So it's like this is kind of like the central transmitter from which the emanation bodies are said to come. But remember that they're all happening simultaneously. Once more, it's not like wisdom truth body comes into play, then that causes the enjoyment body, and then that causes the emanation bodies. But nonetheless, we can refer to it in this way because they're all arising simultaneously. But we can say that's sort of the main transmitter, if you will. If we wanted to talk about where Buddhas reside, in a sense, in that kind of permanent way that we talked about earlier on in one of the presentations, then that was the third presentation, I believe, on result. The idea is that that is where they're sort of abiding, is in their own pure land. And on the learning path, again, you create the causes through your purification of the mind to attain that beautiful land that will be there for eternity again. It has a definite retinue. This is the second of the 3 definite qualities or certainties. An enjoyment body is always surrounded only by superior bodhisattvas, Arya bodhisattvas. Ordinary beings, hearers and solitary realizers, are unable to perceive a Buddha's complete enjoyment body, right? Only those superior bodhisattvas who have generated a direct realization of emptiness have access to that. It's a main way that the Buddhas appear for the benefit of those beings, to help them to become enlightened more quickly, to, once they are on that learning path and are actually have achieved that level of realization, it gives them additional guidance. It's thirdly of definite doctrine, certain doctrine, which is the Mahayana. An enjoyment body teaches only the Mahayana Dharma, right? Because its retinue is only bodhisattvas of a superior nature. So it's only going to teach Mahayana Dharma. And it never sets forth teachings of the lower vehicle, right? It's all of the things that these bodhisattvas need to develop their minds on the Mahayana path. The fourth is a definite body. An enjoyment body is always adorned with the 32 major signs and 80 minor marks of a perfect being. And these are all explored in Maitreya's other text, The Ornament for Clear Realization, Salvi Lamkara. And in this book, if you are able to get a hold of a copy of this book, it's kind of rare, The Fundamental Potential for Enlightenment, the one I've been putting on the screen here and there. He goes into each of these 32 major signs and 80 minor marks. Each of them have their own kind of respective causes that give rise to them and so on. But that being always is going to have a body adorned with those marks. There's never any kind of decline from that perfect state. The fifth of these 5 certainties or definite qualities is an enjoyment body abides without showing the aspects of birth and death until cyclic existence has been emptied of beings. Remember that we had those high-level bodhisattvas, the pure ground bodhisattvas, as well as the hearers and solitary realizers who are arhats. They still had this mental body, right? It's a very wonderful body to have. It's not coarse like the bodies we have at all, but it goes through a death and rebirth, right? We abandon all of that. We talked about this previously in this text. And when you attain the complete enjoyment body, it will abide without birth and death. We'll be hanging out in that pure land, teaching those Arya Bodhisattvas until samsara is emptied of all beings. Now it says that, I always wonder if it also means till all beings are Buddhas, because being, again, out of samsara doesn't necessarily mean that you become a Buddha. But nonetheless, this would be the work of Buddhas, is to eventually get to a place where all beings are enlightened. Now, what happens then? Well, the Buddha never answered that question, and maybe it's not something that's that important to contemplate, because there'll be a huge party, I imagine, because we'll all be enlightened. So we don't have any more work to do at that point. But again, it's effortless work as a Buddha anyway. Let's go to the commentary that Gyaltsab Je gives on this, again, with just some background about what these various bodies are in terms of the two form bodies. So the first of these three bodies, again, was the nature truth body. The beautiful nature body is likened to a precious statue. Why? Because it is naturally unconditioned by other causes and circumstances, because it's kind of in that state of that golden precious statue. And because it is a treasure of good qualities, such as the 10 powers and the 4 fearlessnesses and so on. There are all these 18 unshared qualities and all these other ways of delineating the qualities of a Buddha. The nature truth body is together with the wisdom truth body. So this is where, again, it is what allows for all of that to develop and becomes, in a sense, a treasure of those, even though we're mainly talking about here, again, the nature truth body, which is the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha, together with its freedom, its cessation of all the natural defilements. Has no natural defilements, that's its natural purity, but it also has this adventitious purity, free of everything that obscures our mind currently. So that's why the treasure is being set out, or the statue, I'm sorry, because it is unconditioned by other causes. And we'll see a little bit better explanation of this with Geshe Loden's commentary. That was number 7. Number 8, the simile for the enjoyment body is a universal emperor. Again, this idea of a universal emperor, it's a samsaric result, but it's a being who is born that has the Dharma knowledge to be able to have a kind of a rule over various continents and produce a very beneficent community of people, and have all sorts of wonderful effects within samsara. It's because the enjoyment body reigns over a great kingdom of great Dharma, which means that it makes complete use of the kingdom of the Mahayana Dharma. So that's the correspondence between a universal monarch and a complete enjoyment body. Then the ninth and the final of these similes in terms of what's obscured, in comparison to the features of the enjoyment body, the emanation body is like just an image or a reflection of the enjoyment body. It is therefore likened to a golden image that has, I guess, some reflective qualities here. So again, we can say that there are times, obviously, when the emanation bodies do appear with these 32 major marks and 80 minor signs, such as what's called a supreme emanation body. And that's just a little footnote. Emanation bodies refers to any other ways that Buddhas appear for the sake of any being. It can be an Arya being, but it's mostly ordinary beings that they're appearing for, right? Well, Buddha Shakyamuni is actually said to have been a supreme emanation body. A supreme emanation body shows the 12 deeds of a Buddha and begins the turning of the wheel of Dharma in a world system and so on. So it's a very unique form of an emanation body under Manakaya that actually, when there's the karma in a particular world system for that to happen, then that appears and begins the process of this unfolding of the Dharma and helping sentient beings in a very unique way. And recall that Buddha Shakyamuni is said to be the 4th of 1,000 Buddhas of this fortunate age that we are in. And the 5th will be Maitreya. So again, we're dealing with this amazing opportunity of having Buddhas coming in this supreme emanation body form, that supreme Nirmanakaya. And that's a very unique one to kind of get the Dharma going in world systems and so on. Let's go back to the commentary. There's a little bit more, I think, to share on this. No, I think we have to just go on to the slides then at this point. Yeah. Yeah, well, let me go ahead and finish this, and then when we come back, we're going to skip over the scriptural authority stuff as well. This section's called "To have the lineage of the Buddha is to have the essence of the Buddha." By possessing the lineage of the Buddha, all sentient beings are said to possess the Tathagata essence. Therefore, these 5 examples are on the basis of being endowed with the lineage to attain the 3 bodies of the Buddha, right? Being endowed with the 2 forms of lineage, naturally abiding and developmental, in order to attain the 3 bodies of the Buddha. Therefore, the Tathagata element, which here means cause, because the term dhatu can be rendered as cause, sphere, element, and so on, when we say Dharma dhatu, for example, it expresses the essence of these sentient beings, kind of that causal thing that is in with sentient beings all the time, with their minds. The Tathagata is divided by the 3 bodies, and so the 2 Tathagata elements or lineages are the causes of the 3 bodies. Therefore, here, element means cause, which once more goes back to that way that we saw it in the beginning when we talked about the 7 vajra points, that the substantial cause for bringing about your completion of the 3 jewels in your own continuum is the Buddha lineage, the Buddha element, basic element. Again, different names for it in different contexts. So again, we're going to be skipping over when we come back. We'll go to Geshe Loden's explanation of these. We'll be skipping over the rest of page 203. Actually, the rest of this section, all the way to this next section. So let me go ahead and cue that up right now. We're entering into a new section. Remember, the last time we had a new section was when we got into the 9 similes. So this is kind of the big demarcation in terms of what we're covering in this text. Let's go ahead and go through what Geshe Loden shares on this. Share screen. Let's get that up. Okay, so he introduces 7 through 9, these last 3 that pertain to the 3 bodies of a Buddha. He says, from these 2 Buddha potentials, and naturally abiding and developmental, one attains 3 bodies of a Buddha. What was, again, corresponding to the 7th simile, the nature truth body, corresponding to the 8th, the enjoyment body, and then the 9th, emanation body. By meditating with the natural potential as object of observation, one accumulates the collections of wisdom and attains the nature body. Now, again, he didn't mention in his that you also attain the wisdom aspect of the wisdom truth body that is knowing knowing ultimate truths, that wisdom aspect. But that would also be a product of that meditation on the natural potential, on the emptiness of the mind. Then the next, the developed potential, when induced by great love, compassion, and bodhicitta, develops further and further. One accumulates merit and eventually attains the 2 form bodies, the complete enjoyment body, which is again the 8th, and the 9th, the emanation body. And these 2 are the natural product of the development of merit. I might take it off screen here for just a moment and just mention, this isn't again a course on Tantra, but nonetheless, we do have in Tantra a very unique explanation about what else contributes to the form bodies of a Buddha. And that's because when in the tantric perspective, when we talk about mind, we are once more going to this very subtlemost state of mind, which in Tantra is referred to as the clear light mind. That clear light mind is always together with its mount, this energy of the subtle wind that is together with it. It's always riding that subtle energy. They say actually that the mind, the wisdom truth body, is the product of that developing that mental component. The form bodies are what are produced by the wind element when it's manipulated through the tantric practices of deity yoga and so on. So essentially, we have the culmination of not just merit on the side of creating the form bodies, but also the raw material from which those bodies are formed. The tantric presentation says that essentially in sutra, we don't have a full explanation of what can give rise to the form body of a Buddha, that it does require some sort of subtle material element Now it's interesting because our text was talking earlier about how it's not composed of atoms, and meaning kind of not composed of anything physical. But in the tantric perspective, you have to have kind of something that is a source from which that will be generated, because these appearances do occur. Beyond that, I can't say I know much more about how all that happens. But nonetheless, this is the tantric explanation, is that there's always kind of some subtle wind energy that's together with the mind that becomes the form bodies, I should say, of a Buddha, the Rupa Kaya. Let's look at what Geshe Loden says when he talks about these individually. Number 7, where again we have this precious Buddha statue that represents the nature body. It's likened to that Buddha statue, which is made of precious jewels. The precious jewel, particularly referring to gold in this example, has an abiding nature. It is not newly created from other substances, causes, and conditions. This beautiful, precious jeweled statue is able to satisfy the desires of others. Like that, the nature body is the abiding nature of reality and is not created newly by causes and conditions. It has the power to satisfy the aspirations of living beings, right? Because that's what we've been talking about this whole course mainly, is the naturally abiding lineage, the suchness of our own minds. It has the power, in a sense. It's not the same potential or power as what the developmental lineage is, right? Because we talked about that earlier. But it has the ability through its presence to satisfy all of our aspirations, to bring us to our greatest happiness and well-being. The 8th, this universal king or monarch, the complete enjoyment body is likened to a universal king who enjoys his sovereign domain. Like that, the complete enjoyment body enjoys sovereignty over the Mahayana Dharma. That was pretty similar to what we saw in our commentary. The universal monarch symbolizes the enjoyment body. Just as a universal monarch enjoys power over several continents, the enjoyment body has dominion over and makes use of all the teachings of the great vehicle, right? That's the whole purpose of a complete enjoyment body, is to reside in that akanishta, disseminating the pure Mahayana Dharma to Arya Bodhisattvas to aid them on their path, so they can then become Buddhas and help others in the same way. The 9th, this Buddha image, the emanation body is likened to the image of the Buddha made out of gold. The golden statue, though by nature gold, in appearance, has the form of the Buddha, which can be of many different types, right? Because you could make a smaller statue, or you could make a statue of the Buddha of compassion, or whatever. You can make many different forms out of that gold. Similarly, the emanation body is actually the wisdom of the Buddha itself, but to the eyes of trainees, it appears in emanation bodies of various forms. You know, they sometimes talk about 3 different forms of a emanation body, but as I said, emanation bodies can be anything. Buddhas can appear as non-sentient things, bridges and cars and stones and whatever it is that you sentient beings might benefit from in the moment. The statue represents the emanation body of an enlightened being. It is made of gold, which can be turned into many different things. The emanation body's nature is exalted wisdom, which takes whatever forms will be of benefit to living beings. I think that's it. Yeah, go on to the next section. So let me stop here and just see if there are any questions on anything we've talked about tonight, or in general on these 9 similes, because we're going to be kind of leaving this topic behind to some degree, because we're going on to the last few little residual topics of this chapter. Anyone, anything here in the Gampa or online? Yeah, Stephen has a question. Good.
Oh, thanks a lot. I was just curious what the derivation.
Are you hearing it online, by the way? Everything?
Can you
Yeah.
hear
Okay,
me?
good. Just wanted to check.
Okay. What was the derivation of enjoyment body? I imagine it must be a very blissful experience. Is that where it comes from?
Well, I think it actually does come from that phrase that we saw, enjoyment of the Mahayana Dharma, that it's only enjoying that aspect of the Buddha Dharma. If we can say, I mean, everything the Buddha taught is to help sentient beings to attain both temporal and ultimate happiness, well-being, that the apex of what the Buddha taught is the Mahayana Dharma. And the Mahayana Dharma is enjoyed by this body continually, never kind of departs to lesser dharmas, if you want to use that. I think that's where it's from. Let me check in here real quick, though, because that's again what, and oftentimes, again, it's often referred to as complete enjoyment body. Let's see. Yeah, I am not seeing anything else in this. I mean, you're right in that, this is kind of the culmination of the development of the blissful state of mind of a Buddha. So, I mean, it's going to be having that complete enjoyment, but it's usually, I think, referring to the complete enjoyment of the Mahayana. But anyway, maybe Sean has something to add or another question. I'm not sure. Yes, please, Sean.
No, my question's unrelated.
Okay.
When it was talking about that universal monarch being reigning over multiple continents, do they ever define what they mean by continents? Because I don't get the sense that it's what we call continents.
I'm not really sure. I'd have to do a little more research on that because we even talk about when we talk about in Buddhist cosmology, when they go into this in the Abhidharma Kosha and they talk about the four continents of this world, and you kind of like, well, and that doesn't make sense in terms of what we call continents because there are more than four. But at the same time, it's not real clear about whether they're talking about four individual worlds. It seems like they are, because again, when we talk about when they present that Buddhist cosmology, there's very different human existences in those four worlds. For example, one of them is where you have a definite lifespan of 1,000 years, which is kind of mind blowing to think that you're going to live that long, but it's definite. There's nothing that will interfere with that duration of a lifespan. And of course, it's not a very ideal human realm to be born in, even because you might end up wasting 1,000 years rather than actually doing something meaningful with that life. Whereas here, where we only get up to maybe 100 or so years, it becomes a real motivating factor, to make sure we use this life well. So it's not clear in my mind when we were studying this in Italy, even in the Abhidharma Kosha, when they use the term continent, are they referring to an individual kind of world, like planet Earth would be one of those continents where beings have a particular life on the basis of the karma for humans to be reborn there, and then the other three. But then, it's like, well, where are these other places? I don't know. I think you're right in that it's something generally much bigger than that, not just like continents in a individual world like what we have that we designate as continents. But I couldn't say definitely one way or the other. Maybe Venerable George knows the answer to this. You could put that question to him if an opportunity arises. But like I said, maybe I'll try to do a little more research. The problem is so many of the commentaries, unless you get somebody who's kind of our contemporary age commenting on these things, the question just never arises, right? Because they just take the text as it is and they don't necessarily contrast and compare it with our experience of the world and the terminology that we use. Again, this is a term that's being translated as continents, but what it really means, I'm not real clear about it in my own mind. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that any better. Maybe I'll make note of that and try to do some research. I still have some of the things that came up while I was away, those weeks that I was teaching from my mom's, and they're on a list here, and I'll try to get to those. I'm just kind of swamped since I got back last Wednesday. So I'm hoping to find some time to get to those maybe over the Thanksgiving Day holiday, because we won't be meeting that Thursday, just so you know. We have one more meeting before that and then 2 meetings after. Thank you for the question, though, Sean. Yeah. Yeah, and even like this is quite unique karma to be a universal monarch or what's called a wheel-turning king. You have this culmination of some practice of the Dharma, obviously, that causes you to want to be that. If we look at the world that we live in, I mean, it's hard to even imagine that there could be one being who abided kind of over the entire world with that kind of outlook of creating a very peaceful reign where the Dharma proliferates and all this sort of thing. Must be really unusual karma, not just for the person who does that, but the world that experiences someone like that, right? Yeah. So, any other questions on the 9 similes or any of these aspects? So again, what I would encourage you to do if you have some time, and again, maybe not over the next week because you might be too busy with preparing and whatever, but we've got, again, the Thanksgiving Day weekend when we're not meeting over that. Maybe try to take a look at those charts. Again, this was the pages. Let me put them on the screen again. Pages, I don't know. I mean, they've got their own pagination, I think, within that. Yeah, pages 1 through 4 of chart number 2, I think it is. Is that what it is? No, chart 3, sorry. So it again goes into the 9 similes that illustrate. One thing I might mention when we're going through this, if we do get a chance to do this together, that'll be great. But if not, if you at least do this on your own, note that the one thing that isn't really in this chart is the correspondence between that which obscures and its level of obscuration. Remember how we saw that the attachment was correlated with the withered lotus because the lotus is initially attractive and we imbue it with all of these qualities from our own side, but then it withers and becomes less attractive, just like a lotus becomes ugly and unattractive. So the idea is that each of those are corresponding and they're not really set out in our chart there. What I'm envisioning, I haven't put together the sort of exam for this particular course because last time I didn't have to give one to anybody. Nobody wanted to take the exam. If there are people who want to take the exam, I'm envisioning again an ability to know at least some of the components of this, so that and it might be again something where people would be asked to provide particular things within a category, as opposed to coming in and having to know all 9 of them and what have you. But I think it's important that you understand all of the dimensions of any one particular one of them and that you can kind of speak to that. So if you can kind of get the correlation of all these things, the correspondences, I think that's good to know. And I just want to point out that that one is lacking from the chart that is there. And that has to be then referred to in terms of the material I presented in the commentary. So now we go into an interesting section that's called the consciousness that perceives the basic element. This is kind of getting into, it's kind of weird that it's given that title when it's mostly talking about those who are blocked to seeing the natural element, the basic element. So it's a little bit of a strange title for it. I guess it's inferring that anyone who is not blocked in those ways is then realizing the natural element, is the consciousness that is perceiving it. It's kind of like, talking about something by default. If we say it isn't all of this, isn't all of that, and so on, then we are inferring that it is the opposite of that. So again, this section is divided into 2. In the hearer and solitary realizer, the basic element is understood through faith. When we talk about faith here, let me read the rest of it and kind of get us into that section, and then I'll talk about that. And then secondly, the 4 kinds of person do not perceive it differently. In other words, they still have some obscuration and they're perceiving it only through faith, again, which would still include hearers and solitary realizers. So this first section is first linked to the previous one with this idea of, teaching, there we go. Went too far down now. Now too far up, sorry. Trying to get this exactly where it needs to be. And I think I went too far down again. Why am I'm clicking on this, but it's not going in a very orderly way. It's weird. Usually the arrow allows you to go down just a tad. If I do this, I'm afraid I'm going to go too far. Okay. So teaching that all sentient beings possess Tathagata essence. This is kind of interesting. He brings back in once more, verse 27. That one that I mentioned last week that's very good to memorize. Again, because the activities of the Dharmakaya are pervasive, because suchness is undifferentiable, and because of having the lineage, all sentient beings always have the Buddha essence. So that very first statement here, the Tathagata essence exists undifferentiated in all beings at all times. This is to be examined. What is its validation? reality in the sense of existing in this way and in no other way is its validation. How can this essence be described? Because it pervades all sentient beings, it is vast like the Dharmakaya. So again, this is where it's using that Dharmakaya that once more is the knowledge of a wisdom truth body that is pervading all sentient beings, helping all sentient beings, but the fact that we also have this naturally abiding lineage that pervades our minds and is capable of being transformed into the Dharmakaya of a Buddha, capable of becoming the cause for that. This is taught by the root text line, right? And that was the one that we started with, because the activities of the Dharmakaya are pervasive. Then the second part of this, in terms of its nature, it possesses the characteristic of being undifferentiable from the nature of the Tathagata. This is taught by the root text line of verse 27, because suchness is undifferentiable. And that was the second line of that verse I just read. Because this is the third part, because it unquestionably exists, it is a definite lineage. All beings have that potential, the developed potential that could be transformed into a Buddha. This is taught by the root text line and because of having the lineage. So again, if you go to the footnote, these lines are all from verse 127. So again, he's just reiterating that all beings have this potential. So now we're going to talk about all of those beings and how we would parse them up into those who don't yet know the natural element, the basic element, and those that do, in a sense, is what we're going through here. All right? So the citation begins. This is a connection to scripture. The citation begins, son of the family, The emptiness that is the nature of the minds of sentient beings is not something newly established by the Tathagata, right? The Buddha didn't establish this. The Buddha didn't bring it into existence. And then it disappears when the Buddha is no longer in the world. It's something that has always existed. It's not conditioned on a Buddha saying that it's there. It has always been there. It is the nature of our minds. Okay, then let's go down. I'm going to try to do this. Whoa. I knew it was going to do that. Okay, so it says, in terms of the meaning of it here, in the logic of reality, the emptiness nature of the minds of sentient beings is like this only and not to change to anything else. Again, concepts that we've seen throughout this text. It's exactly like that. It's always the same reality, and it doesn't change. It's unchanging. To perceive this by valid cognition is the logic, yoga, and method of its establishment, right? This is how we have to go about achieving it through valid cognition. I'll take it off screen just a moment. Valid cognition is, of course, the process that we engage in through reasoning and analysis, where we actually are able to move from our incorrect consciousness that is grasping at inherent existence through a process of doubting that we're correctly thinking of things, to start to move towards what is correct. We eventually develop a correctly assuming consciousness that's a belief in emptiness based on kind of assuming that that's the way it is for various reasons. But we, moreover, have to develop valid cognition, which is of two main levels. The first one is what's called inferential valid cognition. Inferential valid cognition is when, through reasoning, we get to a place where we are getting emptiness, but it's still in a conceptual vein. It's still through a proof where we are working with our conceptual analysis to discern emptiness. And we're discerning it correctly at that point. It becomes inferential cognition. It becomes a knowledge of emptiness, a realization of emptiness, although not a direct realization of emptiness. Prior to that, although we might be correctly assuming that there's emptiness, and we might even have some initial movement towards it through doubts and what have you, we don't really have a valid cognition. Because a valid cognition is one that is unshakable. Incontrovertible is the term that they use when we study that in the basic program module on mind and cognition. What we mean by valid cognition is something where you won't be shaken from that any longer, because you've done initially the analysis and reasoning that gets you to that incontrovertible knowledge of emptiness, still conceptual. On the basis of that and developing your deepening of your meditative concentration, you then develop what's called a direct realization. Direct realization is that experience that we've talked about throughout this, when it's like water poured into water, when the knowledge of the bodhisattvas of emptiness becomes one with emptiness itself, where there is a transformational experience. That's the meditative equipoise of a bodhisattva that then is capable of removing the layers of obscuration. So that, of course, is a direct realization. It's a continuation of valid cognition. Valid cognition starts when we are able to have that incontrovertible knowledge through reasoning, through analysis, through developing our own inferential proof of emptiness. That's what, of course, all the reasonings that we go through. Many of you have studied other courses on emptiness, and the course that I'm teaching on Monday night in Discovering Buddhism, we look at two of the main reasonings, the reasoning of dependent arising and the reasoning that's called the 4-point analysis, usually used in regard to analyzing the person to get to an emptiness of the self, the person, but nonetheless can be used with other phenomena as well. So that's what's being talked about in regard to this passage here, where it says, to definitely perceive or to perceive this by valid cognition is the logic, yoga, and method of its establishment. We establish the emptiness of the mind through a process, right? Through a logical process of analysis, reasoning. It is the actual yoga, the practice that we engage in, and it's the actual method to establish that emptiness. In brief, this means to definitely perceive the mind, which refers to the logic that searches for and ascertains its actual state. In other words, its emptiness, its ultimate truth. To truly know the mind, which refers to such ascertainment, that's another thing it's referring to. And this is the understanding of reality and the logic of reality. Can't explain all the kind of way it's put together there, but it's essentially pointing to the fact that this is the means, the method by which we know that emptiness of the minds. Because once more, in this section, we're talking about those who know this reality and those who do not know this reality. All right? This is not to be contemplated by one's wisdom that holds mere reliance upon dialectics as a complete understanding. That's more akin to, again, a correctly assuming consciousness. It's just, somebody talks nice about emptiness. We go to teachings on of His Holiness talking about emptiness, and it sounds very reasonable and logical, but we haven't done the actual investigation ourselves yet. Well, then we don't really know emptiness. We don't have valid cognition of it. So then it says, this is not to be mentally constructed by relying upon the words of others either, right? It's not something we just come to some image of that's not based on actual logic and reasoning. It is solely by devotion at that time. We are only knowing it by devotion, by faith. Perception by constant meditative equipoise is only within the scope of a Buddha. It's kind of an interesting sentence to tack on the end, but it's essentially saying that although we can know emptiness, even into the direct meditative equipoise of a bodhisattva and so on, to have that knowledge all the time, never be parted from it, is only within the scope of a Buddha. But we're not really talking about, again, when we're getting into those who realize the Buddha nature. They're not those that are just knowing it by faith, which are simply because the words sound good, because you've gone to a wonderful teaching, that you then have some faith in emptiness. In fact, we do talk often about followers of faith and followers of reason. And by faith, we often even translate that as scripture, followers of scripture. Those who simply kind of read the words and think it all sounds good. But then those who actually reason through it are the followers of reason. Sometimes these are often correlated to the dull faculty than the sharp faculty bodhisattvas, meaning that those who are a little bit less inclined towards intellectual pursuits will not necessarily do the investigation right away. They need to work with it through faith and by depending upon the scriptures initially, and then over time they are able to develop that reasoning mind. Because no one's fixed in any of these. We're all changeable because of everything we've talked about in this course. But these are kind of two ways of approaching emptiness. Followers of faith or scripture will have great confidence that emptiness exists, but never do the initial investigation until much later in their spiritual practice. Whereas followers of reasoning are those who I would assume are somewhat like us gathered here, going through these teachings, that want to know more, want to investigate, want to have the confidence. Remember in that chart, let me put that up on the screen, when we talked about I don't know if we went into this very much because I didn't go through this entire chart. When we talk about kind of what precedes the, maybe it's not on this one. I think it's on the other one. Shoot. Yeah, this isn't on this one. When we talk about that, and let me go back to where we were and get off the share here. We talk about what are the causes for a bodhisattva to enter into the path or to become a bodhisattva, being to become a bodhisattva. Because once more, you don't have bodhisattva until that very initial point when you enter the path of accumulation. When we talk about what causes you to become a bodhisattva, we can say that there are three main causes: great compassion, and then, of course, the mind of enlightenment that is formed on the basis of that. And for sharp facultied bodhisattvas, it's sort of this non-dual understanding, which means some level of investigation into emptiness, so that it becomes at least some inferential knowledge of emptiness. And we won't have a direct realization of emptiness prior to entering the path, but you will have, unless you're, of course, coming from the Hinayana vehicles. But the idea is that you will at least have some investigation into emptiness. Now, why do bodhisattva wannabes, let's call them, or bodhisattva aspirants, why do they actually do this? Because they are followers of reason that want to know that there is a method by which you can actually achieve these results. So they will investigate emptiness prior to entering the path. Again, and I would guess most of us are probably in that category too, unless you have uncontrived bodhicitta, which I prostrate at your feet. I don't have any such mind. Then you are definitely in this category of someone who is inclined towards the Mahayana, not yet a bodhisattva, but wanting to do the investigation to assure that there is a path that will lead to this result, to generate our own confidence. So those beings we can call as having some level of realization. We're not saying they have a direct realization, but they have realized emptiness enough to generate that confidence. So what we're talking about here is we're not, and I think that last comment that I kind of got onto this little track with, we're not talking about those who are simply following by faith, that enter into the Mahayana perhaps or do whatever, but they don't really have a good understanding of emptiness. Or you could even be again on the Hinayana path with misunderstandings. We're going to see this come up, but they aren't, those people aren't realizing emptiness, right? Ordinary beings aren't realizing emptiness. Also, we talk about a Buddha. We're not talking about those are the only beings that realize emptiness, is when you're a Buddha and you're in a state of constant meditative equipoise on emptiness. That's obviously the result we're aiming for. But we are talking about those in the middle. When we talk about this topic of the consciousnesses that are knowing the basic element, Buddha nature, it's the beings who have developed either before the path, a realization of emptiness to some degree, or on the path as these aspiring or these bodhisattvas who are still yet to realize directly emptiness, or those who have realized emptiness directly. So we're talking about, in terms of valid cognition, those two levels. Those who know it inferentially through their own investigation, through reasoning and analysis, and those who know it directly through the wisdom that's generated through meditation, when you have a non-conceptual awareness of emptiness. Is this clear? I mean, this is how I'm reading this section. I don't know if it's absolutely correct in every way, but there's essentially kind of delineating kind of different categories. You have some that are on the scope of just purely having faith in emptiness, if you will. But then we have those who are on the complete opposite of Buddhas. So we're talking about those who are kind of in the middle. The next paragraph. On this point, some say that this ultimate truth reality is therefore understood only by relying upon the words of the Tathagata. Well, such an assertion shows no understanding of the presentations of the Buddha's teachings and an ignorance of the different levels and so on of realizing hidden phenomena and the very hidden phenomena. When we talk about the different classes of phenomena, the Buddha delineated three. The ones that were mentioned here, slightly hidden and extremely hidden phenomena, are in the category of what is hidden from us, what is not directly perceptible to us. The first, of course, is manifest phenomena. This is something we all have access to, right? The things through our senses and that we can understand very easily. The hidden phenomena, we do have to gain some knowledge of through inferential realization and eventually direct realization. Emptiness falls into the slightly hidden phenomena. It is something that we can gain some understanding of. When it comes to extremely hidden phenomena, this is actually said until you become a Buddha, you won't have that knowledge of all of that. This is, for example, the subtle workings of karma. Only a Buddha's mind can know all of that. And for that, we do have to rely upon scripture. So the sentence that preceded this was talking about how for even emptiness, we have to rely upon scripture, right? It was saying, some say that this ultimate truth reality is therefore understood only by relying upon the words of the Tathagata. That's not true. It's not extremely hidden, not very hidden, as it says here. It's simply a hidden phenomenon that is slightly hidden from us. Through reasoning, we can actually ascertain it. We can come to know it. So it's not something that we would depend upon in the same way as very hidden phenomena, such as, again, the subtle workings of karma, that we have to depend upon a scriptural source. The words of the Buddha that say, that this is how certain things come about in our world. I mean, even the coarser ways that karma works, we don't have direct knowledge of that, right? I can't say, when somebody's experiencing some increase in their resources, that's due to a particular cause. Here I go again, trying to get this to where I don't know why it's not working that way tonight. For some reason, anyway, I'll just try to work with it the way that it's coming up. So this is what's being said in that final one. It's not a huge point, but it's essentially saying that, again, this is reaffirming that we can know emptiness through logic and reasoning, and eventually through that direct realization. So the first two lines of 154, I don't know what this verse 1.RAAB is. It's kind of a strange demarcation. I think it's just an error in the when the text was put together. The ultimate essence of the self-arisen is to be realized through faith. Stephen asked about self-arisen before, and again, this is one context where it is referring to the Buddha. And one of the commentaries that I read said actually that we could say that in the final life of a Buddha, just as in the final life of a solitary realizer who's going to become an arhat, we often refer to them as self-arisen because they arise without other teachers being present in that final life. They arise into the form of an arhat, the mind of an arhat. But they say Buddhas also, bodhisattvas also, don't have teachers that they rely upon in their last life, and that's why we could refer to them as self-arisen. So it's like the power of the bodhisattva's movement of their mind to that point has created a momentum that they don't require any other beings to kind of help them on their path. This is a sutra presentation, though. Remember, I did talk about how the 10th ground bodhisattvas, if they go into that final meditative equipoise, they don't have the ability to remove everything that needs to be removed because they haven't yet entered the tantric path. And it's at that point that they do have to depend upon a teacher. So I don't know if in Tantra you wouldn't be called self-arisen then or not, but this seems like, again, we're mostly dealing with a sutra presentation. So in that context, a self-arisen Buddha is a bodhisattva who, on the basis of their developing their wisdom to that degree, do not depend upon a Buddha in that final life before they become fully enlightened. I think I can do it this way. That's how I'm going to do it. Good. Okay. So the natural, and again, the ultimate essence of the self-arisen is to be realized through faith, is the full meaning of this. To realize through faith, again, by those who aren't yet capable of discerning the natural element, the ultimate essence, the emptiness of the self-arisen, the Buddhas. So the natural emptiness, Gyaltsab Je says, or the ultimate truth of the self-arisen, is to be understood through faith and not through reasoning, by hearers and solitary realizers, some ordinary beings, and by some beings who have newly entered the path. Now, one thing to say about this is it's not meaning all hearers and all solitary realizers and all ordinary beings, because what does it delineate? Some ordinary beings. It's referring to different groupings of beings that have these impediments due to them not having been exposed to the teachings or investigated the teachings, and therefore have obstacles to seeing the ultimate truth, the emptiness of the Buddha, of the mind of all sentient beings, emptiness of anything for that matter. Then it says here, self-arisen refers to Buddhas who attained complete enlightenment in their last lives as bodhisattvas without relying upon other masters. So it's actually there as well in our text. But I was seeing it as well in one of the commentaries. Let's stop there. We get into verse 154 CD, and this is where it's talking about those beings, those four groups of beings who do not yet see the Buddha nature, who do not yet see the basic element. And we'll go through that. And that's not really horribly complicated. It's just it's a lot of words to explain these. And then it talks about the main reasons why these beings are obscured to that. So this last section, just before we do the discussion, is really kind of putting forward the idea that there are, when we talk about the title, the consciousnesses that actually realize this emptiness, the Buddha nature, the naturally abiding lineage, that emptiness of the mind, are beings who are capable of actually going through a process of reasoning and investigating to develop some valid cognition of it. Whereas those who fall outside of that would be beings who are incapable of doing that yet, who yet are unaware of it. And you'll see again when we get into these four types of beings, if we talk about the first one, which wasn't in the order presented there, ordinary beings, meaning ordinary beings generally who haven't even entered a path yet, right? Most ordinary beings have great obscurations due to their strong attachment to things as existing inherently. They don't even question it. I think this came up in one of our previous teachings, right? Most beings don't even question the nature of reality. We should rejoice every day that we've at least received teachings that cause us to go, do things exist in the way they appear or don't they? That's already amazing. Is that wonderful verse from Arya Deva that those for whom they've had even just an idea, the doubt that can be moving you in that direction, that already shakes the rafters of cyclic existence, is kind of the way that Arya Deva talks about it. Even a doubt that things exist in the way that they appear. So again, we're talking about those who have that ability then to see the basic element that are not falling into these other categories. By virtue of that, we're going to talk about these other categories, these four groups of beings, and we'll go into that next week. So in terms of the discussion, that was one of your questions for this week, and obviously I didn't get to it. So you will kind of be working with that. There it is, okay. Working with the first question, which is actually a repeat from last week. That's because I didn't finish the 9 similes in terms of the 9 obscured objects. So if you wanted to go through those, the ones that we already covered last week, you're certainly welcome to repeat them. That was the first 3, I'm sorry. We reviewed the 4th and finished the 4th. Then we went on to the 5th through the 9th. And again, what are the ways the similes of the obscured for each of the 9 correspond to or are similar to the respective meanings, right? Why is it that we talk about, for example, the definitive sutra teachings, the definitive meaning sutras, as being corresponding to the honey, right? Or any of these other ones, right? I think we did this a little bit last week, but if you want to finish that with regard to the ones we've covered, and then we'll get into this one next week when we do our discussion, because by then I will have presented the remaining bits of that information. All right? Okay, sorry, I'm getting a little long-winded here with things. Please do the discussion for about 20 minutes again. So at about 5 minutes to roughly, we will reconvene. And any questions or comments from discussion?
Well, I have a question from the teachings, because you had mentioned something about understanding some of these more subtle aspects. I don't remember what you were calling it, but you said only a Buddha would be able to understand these subtle aspects of how the
Of
workings
karma,
of
yeah.
karma. But
Mhm.
aren't people that, I assume there's some people that develop a level of clairvoyance where you're able to observe at least something. Not like a Buddha, but
Right.
you're picking up some of it. Are you not?
Mhm. You are to some degree. I remember one of the strange examples that they used about people who may be misguided by their clairvoyance is the example of somebody who was able to see their past lives. And, that's already a pretty high realization in terms of a clairvoyance, because then the various existences you had prior to the lifetime you're currently experiencing. And they say, but somebody may have the wrong understanding that they think they look back and they see that in their prior life, their immediately prior life, they were a pig, for example. And then they might mistakenly think, well, if I behave like a pig in this human life, then I'll get another human life. And of course, they point out that this is not correct thinking, that you don't have that correlation necessarily between life A and life B, that everything you do in A contributes to B. Life B could be coming from way prior to that, obviously, of a different karma ripening into that human life. So there are people who do gain some conviction in karma by virtue of knowing prior lives and various things that occurred within that through having that awareness. But it's tricky because, again, you still don't know. Just like that person, they might mistakenly think that it was the behavior in that immediately prior life that contributed to that life, and it's not at all. The Buddha would never say that you get a good rebirth out of behaving like a pig. So I think it's tricky. You obviously don't know the intricacies of karma until you become a Buddha. And that is actually said to be one of the knowledges that a Buddha possesses, is the understanding of all the various things that contribute to any particular result. And so when, again, that's just all information that exists in the world that the Buddha has access to once those veils are removed. And that is accessible. So I would say yes. I mean, you might gain some conviction in certain aspects of karma, particularly around rebirth and what have you, but you still don't know the intricacies. You still don't know everything that's involved.
And what about
And
what about the like I talked to Stephen about this the other day, where there's also the aspect of subtle impermanence. And I was wondering, because with some of our technology these days, like you may not be able to perceive it with your eyes, but if you look through like a electron microscope, you're going to be able to see an exchange of stuff happening that your eyes wouldn't see,
yeah,
which is some kind of level of subtle impermanence. But if you
yeah.
look through a technological device, what would Buddhism call that? Is that becoming a can't even remember all these terms anymore, but like a direct perception of
Right.
subtle impermanence, or are you still at a gross level because you've used some technology? Does that make sense?
I would probably say the latter, because again, the person who's observing it has it really kind of changed their perception of everything around them, or has it only changed their perception of what it is that they're observing? And so, and again, what we mean by subtle impermanence is really quite subtle. It's not necessarily just purely indicative of what's happening atomically. It's the fact that there is change going on at every moment with every element of what's appearing before us that's conditioned in that way. So it gets to be a little, yeah, I'm not so sure that it would be identical. It's kind of, there was another example that I was thinking of that was kind of similar to this. It's like in quantum physics, when one of the understandings of my limited knowledge of quantum physics is this idea of the relationship of the subjective awareness in terms of what is being objectively observed. And you might have people who study that scientifically and get it, but do they get the subtle way that Prasangika Madhyamaka says that the mind is involved in creating our world? I would hazard a guess to say no, unless they're studying Buddhist psychology and philosophy, unless they're actually studying the way that phenomena exist according to Prasangika Madhyamaka and what have you. So I think it's really tricky when we start using scientific proofs of things which are valid and are useful in our world, and they do give stepping stones for those of us investigating Buddhist concepts to help us kind of support us in our path, but they're not identical. Otherwise, somebody who's observing this through a microscope would have pretty profound impact on their life by virtue of that. So I think it's supplementary and helps, but it's not the exact same thing as realizing, or even having a valid cognition of it at some degree. Might still be, if they're investigating from that perspective of really seeing the changing nature of things, they might get some inferential valid cognition of it, but they haven't yet developed certainly a direct perception of it that is based on a mental perception. they're seeing it through the microscope or whatever, and the screens that are appearing to them and demonstrating this. But I don't know. That's my thinking. I don't know. Good question. One thing I might just mention before we conclude tonight was that I was telling Stephen and Lou that one thing I was meaning to bring up when we talked about the simile in terms of the eighth, the universal monarch. Remember when some weeks ago, I was talking about how both the sixth and the eighth, the sixth being the seed that we show a development, and remember that is related to developmental lineage. And then we had the eighth where you have the universal monarch. I think it's the sixth and the eighth. Yeah, I might be wrong anyway. The eighth, eighth is the universal monarch. I mentioned previously, some classes ago, that the universal monarch is also something that is changing over time, right? Just like the seed becomes a sprout, becomes a sapling, becomes a tree, and all this. And we talked about that whole process. That's part of the developmental lineage. And yet, we don't really see a correspondence to that in the way that the eighth one is talked about with the universal monarch. But we could still see that there's some kind of correspondence, because as we go through the bodhisattva path, it's obvious that we don't develop like a couple of the signs and marks while we're still a bodhisattva, and then we get a few more later on, and then and eventually we cross over that threshold and we've got all 32 major marks and all our major signs and all 80 minor marks. It's not like that's what happens, but there is this gradual accumulation of merit. We even see it on our chart of the whole path, where you have the three great countless eons of merit that you're accumulating over the various stages of the path, of the five paths. And essentially, we can say that there is sort of a developmental process going on. It's not identical. It's not like the analogy is really literally to be taken that way, that we have something that is going to grow and develop into that in a gradual way, but rather the accumulation of merit is a gradual thing that is done and eventually culminates when one becomes a Buddha with the appearance of an enjoyment body. And an enjoyment body, again, has a more fixed certain domain and way of being, right? Because it's imbued with all of those marks and signs and lives in this body of that nature until samsara is emptied. So it is a little bit different too in terms of the product and what is produced, but nonetheless, it has something that's quite specific related to causes and conditions that lead to it, just like a universal monarch would be kind of arriving on the basis of all of these causes and conditions in the womb, outside the womb, and so on, that kind of contribute to that being in the world. So I don't know if it's identical, and I'm not sure if it's even worth bringing up, but I just thought I would mention it, since earlier I had mentioned how those two of the objects that are obscured are the only ones that show some kind of changing nature, right? The honey kind of remains in a state somewhat. The gold, the statue, all these various things seem to be more permanent in a loose way, not permanent in the sense of completely unchanging. But those two similes do have something that grows and develops. And the one obviously is quite easily correlated to developmental lineage. But the other one, again, we can, I think, loosely correlate it to the accumulation of merit that occurs throughout the bodhisattva path. That becomes like incrementally the cause, so that you eventually get to the path of no more learning, and that manifests in its full form. So anyway, like I said, I'm not so sure it's an important point, but I thought I'd bring it up anyway, since I had brought it up before. Let's go to our prayers to conclude, to dedicate. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And the prayers for our precious teachers, again, as we recite the first for His Holiness's long life, good health, wishes to be fulfilled. We want the same for all of our teachers who are currently abiding with us. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then the prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa, I might mention, I don't know if it's come out to the full TNL community, but they are doing kind of a prayer-a-thon thing this weekend through FPMT, and there's a link that you can sign up for that will allow you to do the chanting the names of Manjushri, which is a prayer that we've been asked to do specifically for Rinpoche's swift return. You can sign up for a period to do that, so that we're going to have like this continuous recitation of prayers around the world this weekend. If you have the opportunity to participate in that, I think you can probably find it at FPMT's website, but hopefully TNL will send the link out because it just went out to the larger organization the last day or so. It didn't go out to TNL yet, did it? I didn't see a TNL message, but so let's make the prayer for Rinpoche's swift return. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And lastly, again, just dedicate for all those beings who you're holding in your heart, whether you know them or not. If their situation moves you, send this energy out to them. Give it away completely so it can become the causes for them to achieve complete freedom from suffering and to find all the causes that lead to true happiness. And may this happen not just for these beings that we're holding in our hearts right now, but for all beings. May they all achieve true happiness and be free from all suffering. Okay, thank you all so much. Again, we have 3 more classes, as I said, 1 more before Thanksgiving and then 2 after. So I will work with the material and make sure we get through it all. But hang in there, be well. I'll see you next week. Okay, bye-bye.